Let's start with Douglas Murray from the Henry Jackson Society. Douglas, what do you think has changed in the last 24 hours?
Freedom of speech is going to be exercised in the British media. One of the striking things about this is that after 2005, when the Gilles Postens cartoons came out in Denmark, which you alluded to in your report, most media in the West took the lesson of those people who burned and looted and rioted and killed, and they never republished the cartoons or anything like them. The only paper that really did and kept doing it was Charlie Hebdo, which said, you know, we're a secular French publication. Mohammed may be sacred to you, but he's not to us. And we believe that all religions have the right to be offended and ridiculed and critiqued equally. And now we've seen yesterday a result of that. So the result today really is simply that the British media, there are exceptions on the continent. The French media some of them have reproduced Charlie Hebdo covers today. Some of the German media have gone on the front cover with cartoons of Mohammed. But the British media has unilaterally decided, Sky, BBC, everyone else, never to show these images. So that's what we've seen, really. The only change is it's less likely than ever that the right to offend, critique, lampoon, draw Mohammed is going to be exercised in Britain.
Let's just talk to Asghar Bukhari. Why can't we show images of Mohammed? They offend some Muslims, they offend some Sunni Muslims, they don't offend all Muslims. Why shouldn't we be able to show these images?
It's interesting the way Douglas mentioned it. It's just drawing a picture of Mohammed. It's not. The images that they're actually drawing of Muslims and the Prophet himself are racist. It's like drawing a black person as a zoo animal or a Jew as an evil banker. Europe has already gone through this, and they've argued amongst themselves. Europeans have argued amongst themselves and said this is wrong. This type of demagoguery and demonisation and this type of imagery is wrong, and they don't publish that about black people anymore, unlike 30s America, and they don't do it about Jews like they do in Germany. The only people who are not afforded this are the Muslims, because we're not human enough or respected enough to have any feelings, and I would argue well done to the British press for having some respect for citizens of this country.
Okay, let's bring in Jodie Ginsberg on that, Jodie. Do you think that's a fair point, that these aren't simply cartoons depicting Mohammed, that they're not simply a representation of something, they are actually offensive? I can't stand here and use racist language, I can't stand here and use homophobic language. These cartoons are the same, are they not?
The cartoons are certainly offensive. I think there's a debate to be had about whether certain cartoons are racist, but we retain the right as part of and parcel of freedom of expression to offend and to critique and to ridicule, in fact, people's religious ideas. And if you look at Salman Rushdie's statement on this yesterday, he puts that very clearly. That's absolutely fundamental to freedom of expression in this country and worldwide.
I mean, Asghar, here in the studio, Charlie Hebdo, it ridicules everybody, doesn't it? I mean, they had a particularly colourful Christmas edition which depicted Jesus in a very graphic and unflattering way. Why should Muslims be treated any differently?
I've heard this argument. Let me explain.
It's not an argument, it's a fact, isn't it? They could ridicule all religions, and they're also been accused of being very sexist as well.
I'll explain. Back in 30s America, if you ridiculed white people, it would make no difference. They control the power structures. It was the black underclass that suffered the demonisation and of imagery that made their lives a living hell, and the policies thus that backed the fact that they were now seen as inferior. It is no different to what happened with Jews in Germany. The people in power, they can ridicule themselves, but when you are demonised, as you can clearly see the marches from Germany throughout Europe, the 3 mosques burned down in Sweden, in a context and a climate where people are vilified and demonised, then it's no longer to say so easy to say, well, okay, well, the power structure is being ridiculed, but the people with no power, the people who are at the bottom of the heap, who suffer the most, well, they should suffer equally. No, because they don't suffer equally.
Jodie's shaking her head. I want to bring in a moment, but first I want to bring in Stig Abel, because we've not spoken to him yet. Stig, your paper, along with all the other papers, along with Sky's, we're saying not broadcasting these cartoons. Should we be broadcasting them? Should we be showing them?
There's a bit of an irony here about freedom of expression, which is we exercise freedom of expression by making editorial judgments about what's put in the paper yesterday. Sky do it all the time, and now are being told that we're wrong for exercising whatever judgment we made. The great thing about freedom of expression is it's freedom of choice. It doesn't mean we will never reproduce images. We made a decision yesterday of how to cover this case, and I think the thing that struck us most forcibly was this was a moment in time in which 12 people were butchered. Our front page reflected the fact that this has a real human cost, and it's nice in a sense that people are rising up to say the pen is mightier than the sword, but of course yesterday was a very graphic example of the sword or the gun being mightier than the pen, and we reflected that very strongly in our coverage today. We ran some of the covers from the magazine, as did other newspapers, but we have to exercise our own editorial judgments, and the great thing about this country and about freedom of expression is freedom of choice. We're a newspaper. I don't think anyone would ever accuse the newspaper of being timid or being frightened to offend people. Indeed, many of the people who might criticise us for not running this image are the sort of people who regularly pillory us for being offensive. We are not a frightened newspaper. Indeed, what the decision we made to publish today, we've already seen people on social media suggesting we should be shot ourselves, and people are making claims about they're going to threaten the Sun as well. So it's not a question of necessarily fear or not exercising freedom of expression.
Just looking at David Aronovich writing in the Times today, and he said a reason why Charlie Hebdo could be singled out for the attack is because the rest of us have been cowards. He's blamed the rest of the mainstream media because we don't publish these images, and they're the only ones who do. They become the target.
But Charlie Hebdo is a satirical magazine that operates, correctly so, in a different set of all sorts of taste boundaries that you wouldn't expect a newspaper or a broadcaster to follow. They're an interesting magazine. The cartoons are interesting artefacts, and they have every right to publish them. And there's a great deal of solidarity among anyone who works in the media for their basic right of freedom of expression, which we all exercise ourselves. And anyone who works in the media felt that gut shot yesterday when they saw what had happened, because we all live in a place where we like to believe we can make editorial decisions. I've got a lot of sympathy for both for Douglas and Index's argument here that there should be a great willingness to make whatever editorial choice that you want to. We made an editorial choice yesterday. We'll make a different one potentially tomorrow and next week. We make these choices all the time, and that is at the heart of what freedom of expression is. OK, more on that in a moment. We've been running a poll today on our social media platforms asking if the media should publish satirical religious cartoons. Let's look at the results so far. Should the media publish satirical religious cartoons? Pretty vehemently, 73% of you are saying yes, they should. 27% of you saying no. You can join in with the hashtag, as you can see, SkyPoll yes or SkyPoll no. Asghar Bukhari here in the studio with me. When we look at that poll, public opinion sees these. They don't see them as being, as you say, racist. They just see them as being cartoons about religion.
I would say most people probably haven't even seen them. Two,
well, that's because they're not being published in any of the mainstream papers.
Rightly so. We wouldn't publish black people, as I said, as zoo animals. So why should we treat the Muslims any different? Why are we less human? Why do we have less feelings? And why are our lives not affected by this type of demagoguery?
But it's not just the cartoons that you're referring to and comparing them to cartoons, comparing black people to apes. It's not just cartoons. It's things like the Museum of Metropolitan Art in New York removing all historical representations quietly of Muhammad from its galleries. There are lots of mainstream images of Muhammad that are not shown, and they're not in any way offensive.
The problem with this is it's being seen, and I believe wrongly, through the prism of freedom of speech. Those attacks yesterday are really to be seen through the prism of the war on terror. The Al-Qaeda Yemen alleged to have carried out the attack. It was the foreign policy that has polarised this world, both on both sides, that is creating extreme reactions, extreme human beings on both sides of this world, and that is just another symptom of what's happening in the war of terror. If we really want to dig into this, don't remove images of the Prophet from a museum. Get to the root of this, and this is the devastation across the world.
The right targets in the war on terror, do you think?
Absolutely not. But then I would argue that these cartoonists should never have been killed. Of course they shouldn't, but they're still racist. It's not either we support the terrorists or we support the racists. No, we can have a middle ground. This is, I don't support these terrorists. I don't killing people for disagreeing with me, but neither am I going to support a racist who goes around demonising millions of people.
Douglas Murray, do you think Douglas Murray, let's bring you in now. Sorry, these cartoonists, do you think they were racists?
Could I please come in and correct? You've given goodness knows how much time to this extremist Asghar Bukhari to have his say. Could I please now have my say about this? It's only 24 hours since a dozen people were gunned down in their offices in Paris. It's really rich that Sky News should be giving this platform at this moment.
We're giving
to this
you your
man
platform, sir. Do give us your view.
But who you've also allowed to just smear the people who were murdered so brutally in Paris yesterday. You've just allowed them to smear those people as racist. Charlie Hebdo, let me please finish my point. Charlie Hebdo, you don't know this, like you don't know any of the background of this, Asghar, but Charlie Hebdo is a secularist, far left-wing, anti-racist magazine. It has made a particular delight in recent years, quite rightly, of lampooning and attacking very virulently the far right-wing leader, Marine Le Pen. You say rubbish because you don't know what you're talking about.
I do.
Let me make the more important point. Let me make the more important point on this.
An actual debate, or are we going to talk about the actual issues here?
Let me make the important point on this, which is that this is not to do with the war on terror, as Asghar Bukhari wants to talk about. This is about freedom of speech.
Please let him speak.
More importantly, you have been massively diverted in this programme from what has actually happened and why. What is going on at the moment, worldwide, and particularly in Europe, is an attempt to shut down any and all criticism of Islam, one religion alone. I'll hold up for a moment. Don't worry, it's not a cartoon of Muhammad. You don't have to get scared. This is the Christmas edition of Private Eye, an image which, on the front cover, lampoons, and quite rightly, quite amusing, not very, the Virgin Mary and Jesus, and has various jokes about where the frankincense should have been bought from and so on. That's perfectly commonplace. But you know what? If anyone had gone into Private Eye's offices yesterday and massacred the staff because of it in the name of Christianity or Jesus, I think that not only would all of the papers today have been a lot more robust, they would have shown, at the very least, shown this image to show what the person who did the killing was so irate about. The fact is that there is something going on which we have to identify. It is an attempt in our societies to make Islam, and in particular the founder Islam, immune from any criticism. It cannot be allowed to continue.
Do you think there is a Muslim double standard going on here?
No, I say there was a Western double standard. Both Obama and Bush have not only killed journalists but had them locked up, and including Al Jazeera journalists in Yemen, and asking the dictator there to lock them up because they were asking the wrong fact. So how on earth can it be just a Muslim issue? What they do, and typical people like Mr. Murray,
in the sense that you say that any representation of Muhammad or any criticism of him in press is different than criticising Christianity, criticising Judaism like Charlie Hebdo has done.
It's not about criticism. It's about demonisation. If you want to debate with me, Mr. Murray, the coward that you are, you won't take me up on it. But in a public debate, let the public come. We can have a critical debate on. We can have a critical debate. Well, yeah, that's right. You run away. You keep running away.
Please try not to make it personal. We are having a public debate, and you've had yours saying he's had his. There's no need to make it personal, sir.
Fine, so what I would say is this. Again, I go back to the point. When you have a white middle class being demonised, there's nothing to fear. But when you have an underclass, like the Jews or the blacks, and now the Muslims, and I find it strange that white liberals can't see this. I can understand why right-wing nuts can't see this. But why can white liberals not see that? Why are we so different? Why do we have to be demonised? It's not about criticism. It's a false argument.
OK, let's bring in Jodie Ginsberg. Sorry, I'm just going to try and deflate some of the heat out of this, Douglas, for a moment. Let's bring in Jodie Ginsberg. What's your reaction to this debate so far?
Well, first of all, let's be clear about something. We should not conflate racism with religious criticism. I think that's a very dangerous development when we start to talk about criticising religions as racism. There are laws to deal with racism. We're perfectly entitled to criticise religions and lampoon religions. That's the first thing. The second thing, and I would agree, we're getting away from the fact that this is a human tragedy. 12 people died, and they weren't all writers and journalists. 2 of them were police doing their jobs, and all in the name of trying to prevent certain images being seen by other people. And I would agree with Stig. As a free speech organisation, we would never dictate what it is that organisations show in their publications. But I think we should be honest with ourselves that there has been a trend towards self-censorship amongst the media, where we shy away from publishing certain images that we think will cause offence. And it's not just in terms of Islam. The trend generally is to move away from tweeting anything, saying anything, drawing anything that we might think offends a certain group of people. And then let's be very clear about this. There is no right not to be offended.
Let's bring in Stig on this. So, Stig, do you think that's a fair assessment? As a journalist, I like you. Do you feel we do have our own filters that we are placing now, and those filters are getting thicker and thicker and thicker? Less stuff is getting through. We are saying less.
I think it's a broader societal one. We live in a country that is desperate to take offence for virtually everything at any one time. And you see people being arrested on Twitter for being rude or obnoxious. And I think that's a very legitimate point. We all live in a world where there is a knee-jerk reaction to anything that is published or broadcast or written. The mob often descends and people lose their sense of judgment. They don't recognise that, of course, people can be offended. Being offended is not a bad thing. It's not something that needs to be protected. I think that the Sun, in common with lots of newspapers, is not frightened to criticise Islam. You might make the argument that actually this is not an existential crisis for freedom of speech. There is an existential crisis for Islam at the moment, as its adherents struggle to come to terms with the fact that extremists at the end of it are regularly doing insane and brutal things in the name of religion. The Sun is in common with lots of people not frightened of criticising people
I'm afraid
for
we
that.
are out of time.
It is religion.
We're going to have to leave it
No,
there.
it's not.
Stig Abel, Douglas Murray, Jodie Ginsberg, and here in the studio, Asghar Bukhari. Thank you all very much for your contributions.